When forces loyal to King John undermined Rochester Castle, it spelled doom for the rebels inside. Within days, they had surrendered. But the rebel barons weren't done yet. Their ally, Prince Louis of France, had sent an invasion force to help the barons overthrow King John. Then, in late 1216, the king fell ill with dysentery and died. His son, just 9 years old, was crowned King Henry III. It was now up to the young king's regent, the 70-year-old legendary knight William Marshal, to protect the crown. He faced a near impossible challenge. England was crumbling. Rebels were taking town after town. But William Marshal bided his time and prepared to defeat the rebels. Then in May 1217, he got the chance that he'd been waiting for. William discovered that the rebels planned to simultaneously besiege both Dover Castle and Lincoln Castle. With rebel forces split and weakened, William Marshal led his royalist army to Lincoln. The castle on one side of the city was still controlled by royalists, under its formidable constable, Lady Nicola de la Haye. But the streets of the city were under rebel control. On May 20th, 1217, the Royalist Relief Force, led by William Marshal, arrived to retake the rebel-controlled city. The future of England rode on the success of this mission. Troops loyal to the king held the castle at Lincoln, while outside, rebels controlled the city. The defenders had to hold the castle until reinforcements arrived, under the command of the King's Knight, William Marshall.
Men of armies of the travail to dawn, men of armies.
Hestes and on sewers ahead.
Yare to done some work. Verende sewer het.
It's in Jet Yahweh share highwaymen. Got get Boa is ibu. Ik heb verende war of seriende hestes nu.
Men of armies of the Fellet to an end, men of armies!
Something to Shetton?
Send the man to me now, kiss.
Yahweh shit.
What need us be undone?
Sperimen Yara.
Ik'll build thee that for thee. You're right to done some work.
Yara unto a marker.
If you go on block on see thee to work.
What of serpent
See
shit.
thee to work.
Din Heston?
Agretes for Hestes.
Kiera Heston. Uppnen better Yahweh. Yahweh sheten. Styrende on seway Hestes.
Luften for Hestes. Folkens! Allunda nu!
Björnes Advers! Avoiders!
Ik hier is dat! Ik kill! They are Kette! We're on Fortgangende!
The king's men discovered a building belonging to the rebels. To secure Lincoln, they would need to destroy the rebels' military structures.
Non flash Run for it! Swat that!
At last, the King's Knight William Marshal arrived with his forces. While a hard battle remained, there was now hope for the young King's army. The King's men tore through the rebel fortifications, diminishing the enemy's military presence. The castle now faced a new attack from the rebels' French allies. William Marshal's forces were welcomed in Stowe, a nearby town loyal to the king. If the king's men hoped to lift the French siege, they would need to destroy the enemy forts on the outskirts of Lincoln. The king's army had almost regained control of the city. The king's army razed the last of the rebels' military buildings, but the French siege continued.
Somebody in Chatende! to me brand.
Ut readeth nu, Tullius. He shall lay thee. Duce is none for dead. For Warden Ventus, mit Valvenes.
Is Iboon. Experiment, ja. Jefe mea, but
The spanner on the loaded.
Saddled up on the ready.
What needeth be undone?
Yarwe Shetton.
You're ready to done some work here. Over there. On midway. I place at Ventus.
Yarwe Shetton. For this reader.
Ich be boon to hear.
What needeth be undone?
What wilt thou?
Justice for this reader.
Alita, what needeth work? What wilt thou? Yada, unto a something to shed then. Send them to me no Ventus. It'll have it that yada, unto a marker. Fresh marker. See things work.
I think they exist.
In Heston? Building done.
Jefe mea,
It looking good. Something to shed.
Boa is Iboon. Hestes for forward Shetton. Come on in bed, friends. Boa is Iboon.
Intendeth new, Tulkis.
Freckers, intended new.
It is Sita for actus, for Warden Ventus, mit Valvenes. Circus.
Min spärre. Fusse Tulkis. Hestes, nu that. Kom och ta. Det kan du.
Nu, Tulkis, set it down. Ut readeth nu, Tulkis. Trebuchet, ja. Attente to serve.
Today is none burden. Each live to hear.
Alles with
The King's men uncovered one of the French forces' siege camps near Lincoln. The King's army tore through the French fort, weakening the enemy siege.
Certes. Dute is none worden.
Clone, this is a mickle matter.
Yet to be ready for Hestus.
No Hestus anon, Tukas. Hestus for Allah here.
Thee, Hester. Virtue guides me way.
Sperimen Yara. Verende sua het. Min sperimen. Je feka verende nuaos. Al Suiza, yes. Yarwe Sherton. Foliende Hestus.
It is Sether for actor, who readeth new to this. Look out, certes. Fort warde frecus, mid balvenes. Dieter jaura armes, for ferre.
What wilt thou? My way is clear. Friendly, so ahead. Holiness leaders me way.
It is Admina Worda ferre.
Ich be boon to hear. Virtue guides me way.
Hellingham ac Faith.
Freckers, intendeth no.
Fi'n hest. Ishil anon.
Nu, Tulkes, I shall lede jer.
Boon to him.
Get thee ready for Hestus.
Ich be boon to him. Market Yara, my friend. Thine munkas a standard Yara.
Look jou be thee ready, Freckes.
Freren, a dieten die sam. Thine munkas vat well be done.
It is Sitha we shall lede jer.
Market Yara, my friend. Het is Sitha to fan. Munkas, Sitha to move. Thy will be done. Yes, Ishil. Het is Sitha to fan. Sure, fair men.
Nu, Tulkes, set it jer. Alles with it. Ut readeth nu, Tulkes. Fortfarande, Freckes, mit Valdenes. Attente to serve.
Boon to him.
All Knitter's yard. It's liveth with the law.
This is a mickle matter.
You say it's none more death. At me no word. Feneth. At me no word. Feneth. You say it's none more death.
Jefe mea but.
What shall each do?
Address it yourself. Swat ahead. Spanner on the loaded.
No Hesters and on. It's the Hester. Better.
Boa is ye fool.
See they to work.
In Hester?
Then they that rate to know. What needeth be undone.
What shall each do?
Then they that rate to know.
Wow, service chapter. Jefe mea but.
And a fresher marker.
It's better is Yara.
God sweet shall it be,
Something
mate.
to Shetton.
This shula who do they, mate?
What wilt thou? That well be done.
What needeth be undone?
Experiment Yara.
Ich am on me way.
Yara onto a marker.
Reader,
Hesters
the light
on
head to
commander.
Hesters.
Steer away, Allah. What of surfer chatter?
Yerwek of London Bar. Something to Shetton.
Over there. Up me one.
In Hester?
What they and they so ahead. Yeah, so it they hate them. Yeah, did the wind then. Holst it down. But then they so ahead. Yeah, tis the wind then.
Where are the swordsmen?
Intendeth Pyrenees Hester.
Intended to Hester. Pretende su ahead. Ventus is enemy of me. Boa is sur their heads.
Stay to worker.
Be ready for Hestes. Toolkits, öre Hestes. To when they hit.
Ich be boon to him.
My way is clear.
Ja.
What needeth be undone? Verende, so ahead. Eagle haveth that he builden anon.
Toolkits, öre Hestes.
Intendeth foreign as Anna.
Alrita.
Hestes, seek thee to Baron. Hearkeneth for Hestes. Intendeth well, Hestes.
What shall each do? Quar of servant Chapter. Hestes contender.
Thing is the freckers. Intendeth no.
Den Hestes?
Any other Gandhi to push it. Better, Toolkits, better. Any other Gandhi to push it. Steerende away, Allah.
Experiment, yes.
Doende mi tute. Vidende for.
Intender better, Toolkits, better.
Experiment, yes.
Hearkeneth for Hestes.
Hestes for this reader. Hestes for Anne.
Wait on getting
Claude. This is a mickle matter.
Min sperre is Yara. Klom hit. Hestes.
Seek thee, Baron.
Befreren. Hestes.
Steerende away, Allah.
You're ready to done some work. Ich am on my way.
Oh, that is him.
Hestes on commander.
Freren, I've beaten these out.
Toolkits, öre Hestes.
What wilt thou?
Enter better, Toolkits, better. Yeah. there we sungas. Any other goddamn to push it.
Surely held a net. Stirende nu. Ich come on prepara.
See thing to work at. Build it up for that.
Scouter, ik wil do that. Het will be done. Verende swahet.
Arculus for Hestes.
William Marshal and Nicolas de la Haye had saved the city, and with it, the kingdom. After England defeated the French at the Battle of Bremule, Normandy was back in King Henry's hands. But 1 year later, his good fortune turned to tragedy. In 1120, his son and heir William Adelin died in a shipwreck. The future of Henry I's kingdom was in jeopardy. Henry desperately needed a new heir. With no legitimate sons left alive, he broke with tradition and chose his daughter, Matilda. Henry forced his barons to swear an oath to accept Matilda as queen. But when the king died, they broke their promise. England would not be ruled by a woman. Matilda's cousin Stephen saw his chance and claimed the throne. The crisis moved to the capital. At Westminster Abbey, Stephen was crowned king, but Matilda wanted what was hers. She was also lining up powerful supporters who would fight Stephen for her right to rule. Their conflict engulfed England in civil war. Fighting raged throughout the land. In 1141, everything focused on one of the kingdom's most strategic cities, Lincoln. Matilda's allies had commandeered the castle. But King Stephen was determined to take it back. He besieged the castle. Stalemate. As dawn broke on February the 2nd, everything was about to change. Matilda's half-brother, Robert of Gloucester, raced to break the siege. As Robert's forces approached Lincoln, Stephen's army turned away from the castle to face them. Robert could win Matilda the crown, but only if his army could win the day. A counterweight Trebuchet was the king of all siege engines. A catapult capable of smashing down castle walls from great distances. At Warwick Castle in England, they've built a replica, one of the largest in the world. Originating in 7th century China, by the 13th century, trebuchets had evolved into devastatingly powerful weapons.
Such a simple design, but so effective.
It has several key features. A pivoted arm with a weight at one end, and a sling to hold the projectile at the other. To prime, the 6-ton weight is raised using tread wheels.
So this is one of the wheels, one of two that's attached to an axle, which would lift the counterweight, weighing 6 tons. It's based on muscle power alone. What's essential about launching a projectile as far as possible is making sure that this end of the arm is moving as fast as possible. So once that weight drops, it really sends this point of the arm moving at its highest velocity.
This was done by positioning the pivot close to the counterweight and by launching the projectile from a sling. When released, the sling whips round, vastly increasing the launch speed. Trebuchets were carefully aimed, like modern guns.
In order to weaken the castle walls or even breach them, you had to make sure that the projectiles hit the same spot every single time.
For each projectile to follow the same trajectory, they all had to be the same weight and shape. To achieve this, masons used a gauge.
Now I'm going to load this projectile into the sling. Oh, this one must weigh about 25 kilograms, but some projectiles can get up to 150 kilograms. That's the weight of 2 men.
Trebuchets were also used to throw burning tar, beehives, even dead bodies. Anything to cause maximum distress to the enemy.
Do you hear that whoosh?
It was the counterweight trebuchet's lethal combination of power and accuracy that made it the ultimate medieval siege weapon. Victory over King Stephen at Lincoln gave Matilda the upper hand in her fight for the English crown. But in the years that followed, fragile loyalties shifted, and under threat of capture, Matilda was forced to retreat. As her holdings in England came under attack from the king's army, it fell to her son Henry to keep Matilda's claim to the throne alive. At Wallingford, in the shadow of the castle, Matilda's faction, commanded by her son Henry, proved it was still willing to fight King Stephen for the crown. But after 15 years of conflict, both sides had had enough. So, they made a deal. Matilda would surrender her claim to the throne on condition that when Stephen died, her eldest living son Henry would succeed him. A year later, he was crowned King Henry II, and proceeded to grow the kingdom into the mighty Angevin Empire. But, once again, what the king had spent his life building, his own children were destined to destroy. King Henry II had 4 surviving legitimate sons, and he planned to divide up his kingdom between them. But they fought bitterly for dominance. Against the odds, Henry's youngest son, John, became king. But King John was deeply unpopular. He lost huge swathes of the Angevin Empire gained by his father, then failed to reclaim them in expensive battles. Paid for by taxing his subjects. Eventually, England's barons could take it no more. They forced John to agree to a charter that restricted his power, the Magna Carta. But he went against his word. Furious, they rebelled, inviting Prince Louis of France to invade England. In 1216, Louis sailed to Dover and set his sights on taking this, Dover Castle. Held by forces loyal to King John, it was commanded by Hubert de Burgh. He described the castle as the key to England. He was right. If it fell to the French, so would the kingdom. In the year prior to the defense of Dover, King John's defiance of the Magna Carta had mired England in a rebellion known as the First Barons' War. Across England, barons broke ties with the crown and seized important cities, including Rochester. With his reign under threat, John deployed his forces to retake Rochester and capture the traitors.
People often imagine that castle walls were just left as bare stone, but in fact they weren't. They were plastered, painted, and decorated.
The process of making medieval paint begins in a quarry.
This is a sandstone with a really high iron content. In it, we find pockets of ochre. This is iron oxide, like rust, and the ochre is one of the main ingredients in pigment making.
First, the ochre is crushed into a fine powder.
The finer the particles in paint, the better the paint will be.
Once ground up, water is added. Then the mixture is sieved.
This is the exact opposite of making pasta at home. At home, when you sieve your pasta, you then keep it for your meal. Here, what's going to end up in the sieve will be discarding.
What's needed are the tiny particles suspended in the water.
Once it's dry, it's going to look something like this. You can see that all the water has evaporated, leaving just this very fine crust, which will then be ground into the fine pigment which is used to make paint.
But ochre's colour palette doesn't end there. If it's heated, something magical happens. Yellow ochre turns red. And heating it for even longer creates a whole spectrum of colours.
It's been burnt for over 72 hours at 1,000 degrees Celsius, and that gives us this incredible purple colour.
To turn the pigment into paint, it's bound together with egg and tree sap.
A popular motif in the Middle Ages was the use of stones and roses. That's where you paint on blocks of stone to make it look like you could afford to pay stonemasons to produce dress blocks of stone and then decorate them with 5-petaled flowers.
So, medieval castles were far from the gloomy places we imagine today. They were full of colour and light. When forces loyal to King John undermined Rochester Castle, it spelled doom for the rebels inside. Within days, they had surrendered. But the rebel barons weren't done yet. Their ally, Prince Louis of France, had sent an invasion force to help the barons overthrow King John. Then, in late 1216, the king fell ill with dysentery and died. His son, just 9 years old, was crowned King Henry III. It was now up to the young king's regent, the 70-year-old legendary knight William Marshal, to protect the crown. He faced a near impossible challenge. England was crumbling. Rebels were taking town after town. But William Marshal bided his time and prepared to defeat the rebels. Then in May 1217, he got the chance that he'd been waiting for. William discovered that the rebels planned to simultaneously besiege both Dover Castle and Lincoln Castle. With rebel forces split and weakened, William Marshal led his royalist army to Lincoln. The castle on one side of the city was still controlled by royalists, under its formidable constable, Lady Nicola de la Haye. But the streets of the city were under rebel control. On May 20th, 1217, the Royalist Relief Force, led by William Marshal, arrived to retake the rebel-controlled city. The future of England rode on the success of this mission. William Marshal's success in retaking Lincoln was an overwhelming victory for the Royalists. The rebel barons had been defeated, and their French allies driven out of England altogether. William Marshal now focused on creating a stable kingdom for the young King Henry III. To maintain the backing of the rebels, in 1217, a royal seal of approval was given to a reissued Magna Carta, limiting the power of the monarchy. Many barons held lands in both England and Normandy. But now they faced a choice. On which side of the Channel would they make their home? Many chose England. The cross-Channel kingdom was over, establishing a clear English identity. But the impact of the Normans on England's evolution is still felt today. Almost 1,000 years later, the surviving Norman castles and cathedrals still dominate the landscape. In the midst of the modern city, William the Conqueror's fortress, the Tower of London, remains a powerful reminder of their legacy. But it's the unseen influence of the Normans that endures. The Norman invasion changed the English language and established the foundations of modern parliament and governance. And it's all because one man, William the Conqueror, claimed the English crown that he believed by rights was his. The Normans conquered a country and changed the course of England forever. On the banks of the Kalka River, thousands of Rus were killed by the Mongols. The hunters had become the hunted. But in the years leading up to this Mongol raid in the west, Genghis Khan had been focusing his attacks on the east and the Qin dynasty of northern China. Controlling wealthy lands and trade routes, Qin cities overflowed with riches. In 1210, the Qin's new ruler, seeing Genghis Khan as a threat, demanded that he swear loyalty to him. Genghis Khan refused. To the Qin, this defiance was a declaration of war. The Qin had a huge army, and their territory was protected by vast fortifications, known today as the Great Wall. The Mongols had never faced a more formidable enemy. Genghis Khan knew the only way to defeat the Qin would be to take their heavily defended capital city, Zhongdu, on the other side of the Great Wall. Genghis Khan would be committing his people to a long, hard war. Would the rewards be worth the cost? For answers, he looked to the gods. Climbing a sacred mountain, he prayed to the eternal sky. After 4 days, he received his answer. The Mongols would be victorious. With divine reassurance, the Mongol army set out across the steppe. They must break through the Great Wall to destroy the Qin dynasty and further expand the Mongol Empire. From the vast reaches of the Mongolian steppe, an army of over 100,000 men swept aside all resistance, claiming territories that spanned continents. Their leader, Genghis Khan, proclaimed his life's ambition was to unite the world under one empire. Having conquered the East, the Mongols turned their attention to the West, where they would come face to face with some of the greatest armies of medieval Europe. Would Genghis Khan's legendary warriors finally meet their match? By 1221, the Mongols had taken cities throughout Asia, generating vast amounts of tribute from those they conquered. The West, however, was still an untapped resource. Genghis Khan sent his trusted generals, Jebei and Subutai, to attack Europe. With an army of 20,000, Jebei and Subutai took the West by surprise, raiding cities and destroying armies. Within 2 years, they had the prosperous Rus territories in their sights. But in their way was a Rus army of over 40,000 men. Outnumbered, Jebei and Subutai turned and started to head back east. The Rus sensed an easy victory and set off in pursuit of their retreating enemies. For 8 days, the fast-moving Mongols stayed just out of reach. Then, Jebei and Subutai set their trap. They lured the Rus across the Kalka River and turned to fight. The Rus had fallen for one of the Mongols' most effective tactics, the feigned retreat. The stage was set for the Mongol army to test themselves against Europe's finest. And confusion of battle, communications were vital. One solution was the use of message arrows.
Signal arrows could be used to send messages to your drone troops. Faster than a man, faster than a horse.
It was the quickest way to communicate in the heat of battle. Whistling arrows were blunt, and most importantly, they announced their arrival. But they weren't just used to pass written messages. When shot in a volley, whistling arrows could be loud enough to signal to a small group of warriors, telling them both where and when to attack. On hearing the sound, they would gallop in and strike where the arrows landed. However, a much louder sound was required to sound the retreat or to communicate to the whole army. That was the job of the war drums.
The Mongols also used gongs, and the combinations of drums, and gongs gave the Mongols a wide array of signaling options.
We do not know the exact rhythms they used, but basic commands could be conveyed with different percussive patterns. They enabled the Mongols to communicate with their own forces and strike fear into the enemy. They were the heartbeat of the Mongol army. Hearing of the Khan's successful raids, Mongol settlers and soldiers arrived to join his army.
I just know.
You? Berçvenim. Besin. Benim. Bir mörso. Hödülcü benim. Takso. Huraya dokso. Acısınım. Yung. Erdinim aftıcı benim. Besin. Verso. Hang. Ochnam. Mörso. Erdinim aftıcı benim. Çerlik bodaksı boyu. Takso. Hey, verci barloğa.
A Qin trader made it safely into the city and reported on the Mongols' numbers and movements. Chengdu would now allocate